Hercule Poirot arrives at a fog-drenched dock, where lanterns sway in the cold night air and whispers of betrayal ripple among the sailors. A missing cargo, a silenced witness, and a single lantern left burning point toward a crime shrouded in secrecy. With his sharp mind, Poirot must untangle lies hidden in the mist before the dock's shadows swallow the truth. Chapter 1. The shadows beneath the water. Fog came off the water like a living thing, thick, oily, and unnatural, clinging to every crate, bollard, and rusted anchor along the lantern-lit dock at Leaden Wharf. The River Thames lay sluggish and black beneath it, carrying with it the scent of oil, salt, and secrets. Gaslights flickered through the mist and strained halos, casting long shadows across the cobbles. As if the past itself stalked the night. It was a Thursday evening in early October, just after the tides had turned, and all was still. The clatter of a laden-loaded crate rang hollow against the silence. Somewhere, a ship's bell tolled once. A gull shrieked, and then a scream, piercing, feminine, and full of horror. It came from a narrow passage between the dockmaster's office and an abandoned customs warehouse, once bustling with ledger keepers, now quiet, shuttered, and home only to rats and rot. Within seconds, boots rang out as watchmen scrambled toward the sound, their lanterns swinging wildly, throwing lurching shapes across the damp walls. The woman was found kneeling beside a figure slumped against a rusted mooring post. Her gloved hands trembled, and one was slick with something dark, thicker than water. The flickering light revealed her pale face, ghost-like in the fog, and a wide-eyed expression fixed in something between shock and revulsion. The man at her feet, motionless, wore an elegant gray coat and a black silk scarf. A gentleman, no doubt, but the blood running from beneath his collar, staining the cobblestones, told its own tale. He was dead. The woman, tall, with striking auburn hair and a long green velvet coat, was swiftly led away by the dock's overseer and a young constable just arrived from the police post upriver. She gave her name, Vera Rossignol, a well-known contralto at the Royal Opera House. Her voice was shaking. Her story: she had come to meet someone, a private appointment, a matter of utmost delicacy, and now murder. The victim was soon identified as Simon Cattermole, a name that rang through London's legal and political corridors. Barrister to the powerful, consultant to a discreet number of peerage families, and lately, a man whose growing silence had made him the subject of speculation in certain social circles. But what business had Simon Cattermole on a fog-drenched dock so late at night? Why meet a woman of high culture in such a squalid locale? And who had wished him dead? The first assumption, made quickly and with confident strokes by the authorities, was that it had been a robbery, a mugging gone wrong. Yet there were details that did not sit easily with that tidy theory. His wallet remained, though the bills were disordered. His gold watch was missing, but the chain had not been snapped, only unfastened. His right shoe was untied, and his scarf was twisted unnaturally. But most curious of all, his left hand clutched a scrap of sheet music torn at the corner, faintly smudged by rain and ink. Inspector Garroway of Scotland Yard arrived on the scene an hour later, all trench coats and tight-lipped disdain. He was not fond of high society nor the whispers of scandal it tended to bring. He took Vera Rossignol's statement with a practiced attachment, noting her poise under questioning. Too poised, perhaps, Garroway found himself troubled, not by what Miss Rossignol said but by what she didn't say. The body was taken. The scene was photographed. But before they removed the last of the yellow tape from the cobbles, before the fog lifted and the tide pulled a bit more of the night's secret into the cold water, someone else had already heard of the murdered Dot in a quiet flat on Whitehaven Mansions. Nestled in an armchair upholstered in a delicate moss green, Hercule Poirot sat with a cup of tisane. The fire crackled. A newspaper lay folded at his side, untouched since lunch. Poirot was not in the habit of involving himself with common street crimes, but a soft knock at the door urgent, rapid dispelled his calm. A young man, eyes sharp and breathless, delivered a sealed envelope. Poirot opened it slowly. Fingers precise. Inside, an invitation. No, a request. Handwritten. From Lady Eugenia Durand, matriarch of the Durand estate and patroness of the London Chamber Guild. A woman not known for dramatics. Monsieur Poirot, I implore you. This matter is not what it appears. Simon was no mere friend. I fear something terrible has begun. Something old. And it begins with the fog at Leaden Wharf. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A bean, he murmured, his voice silken and grave. The dock. It is calling. Nests pause. And so, with his little gray cells already stirring, the great detective prepared to wade into the fog where nothing was quite as it seemed, and the shadows cast by lantern light hid truths more dangerous than murder alone. Chapter 2. Echoes among the grotesque morning after the murder dawned dim and reluctant. Gray clouds hung low over the city, as if the heavens themselves bore the weight of the previous night's violence. The fog had thinned, but Leaden Wharf remained cloaked in a heavy stillness, broken only by the creaking of moored barges and the slow groan of water lapping against stone. Hercule Poirot, immaculate as ever, stepped onto the dock with deliberate care. His dark coat was spotless despite the damp, his shoes polished to a mirror sheen, and a pale gray scarf was looped precisely beneath his chin. A gloved hand held his cane lightly, not for support, but for elegance. His eyes, however, scanned every detail. Inspector Garroway stood near the crime scene, speaking with a young officer. His expression soured the moment he saw Poirot approach. Monsieur Poirot, he muttered. Didn't expect the Yard would need foreign assistance for a matter like this. Poirot smiled mildly, unoffended. It is not assistance, mon cher Garroway, but rather observation. I have come at the request of Lady Durand. Garroway gave a grunt of disapproval but did not contest it. Well, the scene's cold now. We've collected everything there is to collect. That, I do not doubt, Poirot said smoothly. But sometimes what is collected is not as interesting as what is left behind. He bent, examining the blood-stained cobbles where Simon Cattermole had died. Poirot's gaze lingered on the iron mooring post, still bearing the faint outline of the victim's silhouette. From his pocket, he withdrew a small silver magnifying glass. The body, he said thoughtfully, was slumped against this post. Yes, stab wound to the neck, angled upward likely from someone shorter or crouching. No sign of struggle. Death quick, Poirot nodded. And yet, the right shoe of the deceased was untied. He gestured to the chalk outline. Curious. He had no reason to remove it himself. Perhaps it came undone during the attack. Or, Poirot countered gently, someone untied it deliberately. A detail so small it would escape notice. But it is precisely these details, mon ami, that interest me. He walked slowly, tracing the route from the dock's entrance to the crime scene. He paused near a stack of old cargo crates, one partially open, the splintered wood showing fresh cracks. Ah, Poirot murmured, crouching slightly. Here, you see, a footprint, smudged but narrow. A woman's, perhaps. Miss Rossignol's? Most likely. She claims she arrived here round 10 o'clock. Said she found the body immediately and called out. HMM. Poirot's attention shifted to the adjacent warehouse door, slightly ajar. Inside, the shadows were deep and uneven. He stepped closer but did not enter. A faint metallic scent clung to the air, blood and something sharper. Oil? I would like to see the belongings recovered from the victim, he said quietly. Garroway led him to a temporary station near the dockmaster's office. There, laid out with dutiful care, were Simon Cattermole's effects, a leather wallet untouched, a silver cigarette case polished, unused, a monogrammed handkerchief, and the most peculiar item a torn sheet of music, its corner curled and stained. Poirot held it delicately between two fingers. "You see this note here?" he said, tapping the final measure. "It ends mid-phrase. Not only torn, but removed in haste. From a composition, perhaps? Not just any sheet passed by. Means nothing to me," Garroway grumbled. "But to someone, it meant something. Enough to die for. Perhaps not, but enough to speak of a secret." Poirot turned his gaze toward the Thames. The river was shifting now with the rising tide, and moored vessels rocked gently in place. He pointed to a small ferry tied at the edge of the quay. "Was anyone aboard that vessel last night?" "A night watchman. Says he heard a woman's voice cry out, but nothing before that. Claims the fog muffled all." Poirot was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the lantern still swinging faintly on the bow of the boat. "Tell me, was Simon Cattermole known to be musically inclined?" "Not especially. He attended the opera often, had friends in the arts, but no performance background I know of." Poirot gave a slight smile. "Then it begs the question, why did he clutch this fragment of music in his dying moments? Unless it was meant to point to someone else." Just then, a constable approached with a clipboard. "Sir," he said to Garroway, "we've taken Miss Rossignol's full statement. She's asked to speak to you again. Says she remembered something about a note she received, one asking her to come here last night. Claims she didn't bring it before because she thought it irrelevant." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A note, you say? Ah, Tudor's the note. It always appears, like the ghost in the opera. She says she burned it. For privacy, of course," Poirot said softly, almost to himself. "Burned notes, stolen timepieces, and music left unfinished." He turned to Garroway. "I believe, Inspector, that your theory of a robbery gone wrong may require revision." He tapped the sheet music once more. "And I believe the true melody of this crime has only just begun to play." Chapter 3. The Circle Gathers. Drawing room of Lady Eugenia Dern's residence in Belgrave Square was as opulent as it was imposing, lined with ancestral portraits, ivory inlays, and tall mullioned windows that caught the reluctant autumn light. Heavy damask curtains were drawn halfway, casting the room into a sort of grand twilight. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, more ceremonial than necessary, and the scent of lavender polish and aged mahogany hung in the air. Here, amid silent clocks and gilded frames, the living assembled. Lady Eugenia herself was a woman carved from a harder century. Her spine was straight despite her age, her silver hair coiled with military precision, and her eyes, though shadowed with sorrow, retained the keen glint of the grande dame. She sat at the head of the room, hands folded neatly in her lap, watching Poirot with a mixture of caution and expectation. "You are certain," she said in a low voice, "that this isn't simply a case of some criminal opportunist?" Poirot gave a polite tilt of the head. "Madam, I find it hard to believe that a barrister such as Monsieur Cattermole, wealthy, discreet, connected, should meet with a celebrated opera singer at a fog-choked dock by coincidence, and that he should die clutching music. No, no. It smells not of opportunism, but of orchestration." Lady Eugenia nodded slowly. "Then you must speak with them all." And so, one by one, they were invited into the drawing room. Poirot sat near the fire, legs crossed, fingertips pressed together in contemplation, as Captain Hastings, who had joined him earlier that morning, jotted notes in the corner with an expression both puzzled and alert. "Curious gathering." Hastings murmured, "I dare say they look more like guests at a gala than suspects in a murder." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oui, mon ami. But it is the nature of such people to dress well, even when surrounded by blood." The first to enter was Julian Vale, a tall man with aquiline features and an immaculate sense of style, a music critic of some repute. He carried with him the air of someone constantly suppressing boredom. Simon was a dear friend. he said with a flick of his silk handkerchief, and a man of rare discernment. I was shocked to learn he died in such uncultured surroundings, and yet, Poirot said gently, you knew he was meeting someone there. Vale's brow arched. I knew he had secrets. We all do, Monsieur Poirot, but I assumed they were of the usual sort, private clients, perhaps a discreet affair or two. Not murder. Poirot watched him closely, but let him go with little further probing. Next came Vera Rossignol, the singer who had discovered the body. In daylight, her features seemed even more carefully arranged, beauty touched by melancholy. Her green coat had been replaced with a black ensemble trimmed in dark lace. Her hands were folded in her lap like a statue carved for mourning. I met Simon several months ago, she explained softly, at a recital. He was persistent, romantic. Hastings asked. Vera hesitated. Not exactly. There was admiration, yes, but also a certain tension. He seemed to want something I couldn't quite name. Poirot nodded. And this note he sent, asking you to meet him at the dock? It came anonymously. I suspected it was him, of course. The tone formal, dramatic. But I cannot prove it. I burned it. Poirot did not press. He merely said, Merci, mademoiselle. And she departed with a glance back at the fire. Third was Gerald Finch, a nervy man with round glasses and a haphazard tie, a legal clerk in Cattermole's firm. Finch had the twitchy manner of someone who felt unseen until it was too late. I only typed his correspondence, sir, Finch said quickly. Sometimes. Yes, personal matters, discreet arrangements, but nothing untoward. At least, not that I understood. And yet, you were overheard arguing with him last week. Lady Eugenia interrupted, eyes narrowed. Finch's ears reddened. I had hoped that wouldn't come up. It was nothing. A misunderstanding. He accused me of leaking documents. I would never. Poirot leaned forward. What documents, Monsieur Finch? But Finch bit his lip. Client records. That's all I can say. Poirot made a note of it with a slight frown. Last came Ariadne Durand, Lady Eugenia's niece and heir. She entered with an air of detached elegance, dressed in dark plum silk, her fingers wrapped loosely round a cigarette holder. Her beauty was quiet, calculated. I barely knew the man, she said, almost bored. He handled some matters for the family. That's all. And yet, Poirot asked, he was seen dining with you at the Marlowe Club 2 weeks ago. Was he? She smiled faintly. I dine with many people. Not all of them make an impression. Lady Eugenia glanced sharply at her niece, but said nothing. Poirot stood at last, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. Thank you, mesdames et messieurs. You have been most helpful. In the picture, she begins to form. And what picture is that? Lady Eugenia asked. Poirot's eyes twinkled, but his voice was cool, one in which every note, every silence, and every glance carries meaning. And I suspect someone in this room has played a false chord. He turned to the fire, where the torn sheet of music lay, placed there earlier like an offering. The flames licked close but did not burn it. A melody interrupted is often more telling than one completed. Chapter 4. The Intuition of Poirot. Hercule Poirot had already arrived on the scene in a technical sense. It was only now as he truly turned his attention toward the hearts and minds of the players. In this peculiar drama that his presence was felt. There's a difference, after all, between a guest and a force of nature. The following morning, Lady Eugenia's residence served as the headquarters for the inquiry. Her sitting room had been rearranged subtly at Poirot's suggestion, chairs, placed with surgical precision to observe mannerisms, mirrors uncovered to reflect unconscious glances, even the tea service ordered to expose tiny inconsistencies in social behavior. A room, Hastings, Poirot remarked as they entered, can be more than a space. It can be a stage, and every actor has a truth they cannot help but perform. Hastings raised an eyebrow. You think one of them gave something away yesterday? Poirot gave the tiniest nod. Mais oui. Several things, in fact, none loud, none certain, but enough to suggest beneath the surface there is a harmony that has been disrupted, a dissonance, one we must now correct. The first to arrive for their scheduled conversation was Julian Vale. He took the same chair as before without prompting, legs crossed, glancing absently at the piano in the corner. I never asked yesterday. Poirot began conversationally. But tell me, Monsieur Vale, did you recognize the sheet music found with Monsieur Cattermole? Vale blinked. Recognize it? No, I couldn't even make it out properly. Torn, wasn't it? It was. And yet, you noticed it was torn before I mentioned it. Julian hesitated. Just a moment, but Poirot's I caught it. I may have read it in the report, Vale recovered, or overheard someone mention it. The inspector, perhaps, Poirot said mildly. Or perhaps you have a stronger memory for music than you admit. Julian frowned but offered nothing further. He left soon after, visibly more cautious than when he had arrived. Next came Vera Rossignol. Her voice softer today, touched with weariness. Did Simon mention any enemies? Poirot asked gently. Vera considered. No one specific, but there was always an air of secrecy about him, as if he knew something he wasn't supposed to. He used to say the law wasn't about truth, it was about knowing where truth was buried. A poetic thought, for a barrister. She nodded slowly. He was always drawn to the poetic. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, was he in love with you, mademoiselle? Vera gave a sad smile. He believed he was, but I think it was something else. Obsession, perhaps, or projection. He saw something in me that I don't think existed. You did not return his feelings? No, she said firmly. Not in the way you wanted. Poirot regarded her in silence for a moment, then gave a brief, gracious nod. When Gerald Finch entered, Poirot was ready. The clerk's tie was as crooked as ever, and his glasses steamed slightly from the cold. You had access to Monsieur Cattermole's private papers? Poirot asked without preamble. Yes, but under strict confidentiality. Did you ever handle any documents related to Lady Duran's estate? Finch froze. Yes, that is yes, but I cannot speak of them. I signed a disclosure agreement. And yet you argued with Cattermole over precisely such a disclosure, Poirot said calmly. Finch's eyes darted to the door. He thought I had spoken to someone. I hadn't. I swear I hadn't. Poirot's tone remained soft. But someone else had. Someone close to you? Finch hesitated, the answer forming behind his lips. But he shook his head. I don't know anything about that. Very well, Poirot said, folding his hands. But remember, silence, too, can be a betrayal. Finch paled and hurried out. Ariadne Durand was the last of the morning. She moved with languid elegance, but Poirot noticed today her eyes were less aloof. There was a flicker of calculation behind them. You were seen with Monsieur Cattermole at the Marlowe Club. Poirot began, and I said it was an unremarkable evening. She replied coolly. Yet it was the night before he withdrew a large sum of money from his private account, over £500, that caught her attention. I wasn't aware of that. You wouldn't be, unless you were the one who asked for it. She stiffened. If you're implying, I imply nothing. I inquire, always. Ariadne regarded him for a long moment, then leaned back. Simon offered to help me with something, she said at last. A legal matter. Quiet, personal. It had nothing to do with his death. Nothing ever does until it does, Poirot murmured. When she left, Hastings rose and joined him at the fire. Well, what do you think? He asked. Poirot was quiet for a time. Then, without turning his gaze from the flickering flames, he said, One lies, another hides, a third panics, and the fourth regrets. Hastings blinked. Which is which? Poirot tapped his temple. Ah, mon ami, we must use the little gray cells. It is not yet time to reveal the score. but I promise you this one among them knows how Simon Cattermole died, and another, I suspect, knows why. Chapter 5. Masks and Mirrors. It was well into the afternoon when Hercule Poirot commenced the next stage of his inquiry. The interviews thus far had peeled back the first layers, revealing subtle dissonances in words, glances, and silences, but now came the time to dig deeper. He had no intention of confronting his suspects with accusations. None such methods were for the brutish. Instead, he would invite them to reveal themselves, and they would if only he listened closely. He began with Gerald Finch, summoning the anxious clerk to a quiet corner of Lady Eugenia's study, a room of solemn order, dark wood shelves, brass fittings, and the faint scent of old vellum. Poirot motioned to a leather chair across from him, and Finch sat like a man before a firing squad. "Monsieur Finch," Poirot said gently, "you are, I believe, a man who fears mistakes. Am I wrong?" Finch blinked. "Well, I suppose that's true, sir. In the legal business, a mistake can cost everything, indeed. And that fear, it makes one vigilant. You notice small things, yes?" Finch nodded slowly. Poirot leaned in slightly. "So tell me, what did you notice in Simon Cattermole's behavior during the last week of his life?" The clerk fidgeted. He was tense, irritable, distracted. Distracted by what? I think. Finch hesitated. "He received a parcel. I didn't see who brought it. But after that, he was changed. He stopped taking calls. He canceled to client meetings. He even locked his personal files in the cabinet." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "A parcel. Did you see it?" "No, only the wrapping, in the wastebin later. It was brown paper plain, but there was something scribbled on it. A few bars of music. Handwritten music." Finch gave a small nod. "Just a few notes. In blue ink." Poirot smiled gently. "You have a good memory, monsieur. And what happened to the wrapping?" "I don't know. It disappeared. Maybe he burned it." Poirot made a small sound in his throat, then dismissed Finch with a wave. "Merci bien. You have been most helpful." As Finch scurried away, Poirot turned to Hastings, who stood in the doorway, arms folded, brow furrowed. "A note, a parcel, both with musical markings," Hastings said. "And then Cattermole winds up dead with a scrap of sheet music in his hand. It's not just symbolic, is it?" "No," Poirot replied quietly. "It is a message, and I believe it was meant for more than one set of eyes." Next, Poirot requested a private word with Ariadne Durand, but this time he changed the setting. Rather than the oppressive grandeur of the drawing room or study, he asked her to meet him in the conservatory, glass walls, soft light, the scent of soil and jasmine, a room where lies had less room to breathe. Ariadne arrived precisely on time, poised as ever. She surveyed the room with mild curiosity before sitting across from him. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began warmly, "forgive the informality. I find the soul opens more easily among flowers than fire." Ariadne offered a faint smile. "I'm not sure my soul is quite so available, Monsieur Poirot." "None, of course not. But perhaps just the part that is weighed down with unfinished conversations." She crossed her legs slowly. "What do you mean?" Poirot's voice lowered. "You said yesterday that you barely knew Simon Cattermole, but Gerald Finch insists you and he were often in contact, particularly concerning certain inheritance disputes within the Durand family." Ariadne was still for a beat. "Then, so Finch is talking now? Only about what he cannot keep silent. But you, mademoiselle, you are not just a socialite. You are your aunt's heir, and that comes with burdens." Ariadne exhaled. "Yes, Simon was helping me draft a legal motion. I wanted to protect a portion of the estate that was being quietly siphoned. I didn't want Lady Eugenia involved. She's old-fashioned, and who was doing the siphoning?" Her silence answered. Poirot nodded. "It was Simon himself, wasn't it? Or someone using his position to do so?" I don't know, she said quickly. I suspected. That's why I asked for his help. Did you threaten him? Her voice tightened. Of course not. I trusted him. Or I wanted to. Poirot watched her for a long moment. She met his gaze without blinking. Tell me, he said softly, did Simon bring you music? She looked startled. Music? Something annotated. In his handwriting? No. Her brows knit. Why? No reason, mademoiselle. Only, curious. She departed with an unreadable expression. And Poirot returned to the study. Do you trust her? Hastings asked. Poirot gave a Gallic shrug. Trust? Ah, mon ami, it is not a question of trust. It is a question of silence, and whether it is protecting guilt or grief. He turned toward the window, where dusk now gathered over the square. Someone, he murmured, is rewriting a melody they did not compose, but even the falsest note leaves behind a resonance. Chapter 6. The wrong crescendo the following day brought a sudden shift in the mood surrounding the investigation. Scotland Yard, impatient with the shadows and suggestions that Poirot insisted on delicately following, had seized upon what they deemed a breakthrough. The news arrived mid-morning in the form of Inspector Garraway himself, storming into Lady Dern's drawing room like a man carrying triumph on his shoulders. We've got him, he announced with satisfaction. Gerald Finch, the clerk, Poirot, seated in an armchair by the hearth with a cup of tisane, did not look up immediately. Got him for what, monsieur? Motive, means, and movement, Garraway declared. He tried to flee last night, left his flat in a rush, carrying a suitcase and a burned briefcase filled with half-destroyed legal documents, some of those linked directly to Cattermole's private dealings, including a sizable transaction concerning Lady Dern's estate. Poirot raised an eyebrow but said nothing. We've searched his lodgings, found a torn glove in his drawer right-hand leather with blood traces on the lining, and a monogram scarf, the same type as the one Cattermole was wearing when he died. Finch doesn't own such a thing. You see, Hastings, who had been quietly taking notes at the window, looked up sharply. That sounds rather damning. Garraway nodded. We're holding him for further questioning. He claims innocence. Of course, says he was frightened by Poirot's visit, which is why he tried to leave. Poirot finally set his cup down. Frightened men flee, yes, but murderers rarely do so at the first knock of truth. They wait. They watch. They maneuver. You've been chasing ghosts, Poirot, Garraway said gruffly. When the guilty party was typing correspondence in the next room all along, Poirot did not answer. He rose and walked slowly to the writing desk where the morning papers had been left. The Evening Chronicle bore the headline, Clerk arrested in opera dock murder, jealousy, or blackmail. He tapped the page thoughtfully. It is remarkable, Inspector, how swiftly the press moves when given the scent of certainty. It sells papers, Garraway said. Oui, Poirot replied. And yet, what it sells in haste, it often retracts in shame. He turned. Permit me one question. This glove, was it stained with fresh blood or dried? Dried, mostly. Then it cannot be the glove used in the act. Blood dries quickly, yes, but not instantly. And the murder occurred 2 nights ago. Unless the glove was hidden and only recently removed. It was hidden, Garraway snapped, in the back of a desk drawer. Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? Suspicion, mon ami, is not the same as guilt. Poirot walked to the center of the room, hands clasped lightly behind his back. You say the briefcase was partially burned? Yes, but only partially. It appears the fire went out. Perhaps he changed his mind, or panicked, or, Poirot said softly, perhaps it was staged. That caught Garraway's attention. Staged. Poirot nodded. To make him appear desperate. Think, Inspector, why destroy legal documents if they already implicate you? If he feared exposure, why not disappear entirely, rather than delay with fire and half-packed bags? Garraway frowned. but Poirot pressed gently forward. And the scarf? Too convenient, don't you think? A monogrammed item that doesn't belong to Finch, yet ends up in his drawer after the murder? That is not carelessness, it is placement. Designed to be found, but why frame Finch? Poirot gave a faint smile. Because he was the closest to the documents, the most likely scapegoat. A timid man, disliked and easily doubted. He serves as a perfect distraction. Hastings, still standing near the window, spoke at last. Then if Finch didn't kill Cattermole, someone went to great lengths to make it look as if he did. Precisely, Poirot said. And that effort, that choreography, tells us something very important. The killer is clever, calculated, and afraid. Garroway's jaw tightened. Then you believe this arrest is premature? Poirot approached him gently. Inspector, I do not ask you to release Monsieur Finch. Not yet. But consider if he is innocent. The real killer now knows he has bought time. The room fell silent. Poirot stepped closer to the fire and stared down at the embers. There's an art, he said slowly, to false resolution. It lulls the audience. It ends the performance before the final note has been played. Do you think someone is still playing? Garroway asked quietly. Poirot nodded. Yes, and they have not reached the coda. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken again. The first signs of another fog curling in along the streets of Belgravia. Poirot turned toward the window and watched it gather like a curtain drawing closed. Let them believe they have fooled us, he said. Let them breathe. Let them move. And then we shall listen once more, carefully, to the hidden melody beneath the silence. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut mist thickened over London by twilight, as if the city itself sought to hide its secrets beneath a gray veil. Hercule Poirot, however, found clarity in fog. It dulled the noise, sharpened the ear, and, most importantly, made others believe they could move unnoticed. It was under such cover that he and Hastings returned that evening. To the scene of the crime, the opera dock itself. I must admit, Poirot, Hastings said, glancing about as their cab pulled up to the now deserted Theatre Street. It gives me the creeps. That whole place. I don't know. Something in the air. Like it hasn't finished speaking. 'Tis being Hastings. You have the instincts of the poet, Poirot replied, adjusting his hat and stepping out into the damp cobble. Clerk arrested in opera dock, murder, jealousy, or blackmail? He tapped the page thoughtfully. It is remarkable, Inspector, how swiftly the press moves when given the scent of certainty. It sells papers, Garroway said. Oui, Poirot replied. And yet, what it sells in haste, it often retracts in shame. He turned. Permit me one question. This glove, was it stained with fresh blood or dried? Dried, mostly. Then it cannot be the glove used in the act. Blood dries quickly, yes, but not instantly. And the murder occurred 2 nights ago. Unless the glove was hidden and only recently removed. It was hidden, Garroway snapped. In the back of a desk drawer. Doesn't that strike you as suspicious? Suspicion, mon ami, is not the same as guilt. Poirot walked to the center of the room, hands clasped lightly behind his back. You say the briefcase was partially burned? Yes, but only partially. It appears the fire went out. Perhaps he changed his mind, or panicked, or, Poirot said softly, perhaps it was staged. That caught Garroway's attention. Staged. Poirot nodded. To make him appear desperate. Think, Inspector, why destroy legal documents if they already implicate you? If he feared exposure, why not disappear entirely, rather than delay with fire and half-packed bags? Garroway frowned, but Poirot pressed gently forward. And the scarf? Too convenient, don't you think? A monogrammed item that doesn't belong to Finch, yet ends up in his drawer after the murder? That is not carelessness, it is placement. Designed to be found, but why frame Finch? Poirot gave a faint smile. Because he was the closest to the documents, the most likely scapegoat. A timid man, disliked and easily doubted. He serves as a perfect distraction. Hastings, still standing near the window, spoke at last. Then if Finch didn't kill Cattermole, someone went to great lengths to make it look as if he did. Precisely, Poirot said. And that effort, that choreography, tells us something very important. The killer is clever, calculated, and afraid. Garroway's jaw tightened. Then you believe this arrest is premature? Poirot approached him gently. Inspector, I do not ask you to release Monsieur Finch. Not yet. But consider if he is innocent. The real killer now knows he has bought time. The room fell silent. Poirot stepped closer to the fire and stared down at the embers. There's an art, he said slowly, to false resolution. It lulls the audience. It ends the performance before the final note has been played. Do you think someone is still playing? Garroway asked quietly. Poirot nodded. Yes, and they have not reached the coda. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken again. The first signs of another fog curling in along the streets of Belgravia. Poirot turned toward the window and watched it gather like a curtain drawing closed. Let them believe they have fooled us, he said. Let them breathe. Let them move. And then we shall listen once more, carefully, to the hidden melody beneath the silence. Chapter 7. The psychological gamut mist thickened over London by twilight, as if the city itself sought to hide its secrets beneath a gray veil. Hercule Poirot, however, found clarity in fog. It dulled the noise, sharpened the ear, and, most importantly, made others believe they could move unnoticed. It was under such cover that he and Hastings returned that evening. To the scene of the crime, the opera dock itself. I must admit, Poirot, Hastings said, glancing about as their cab pulled up to the now deserted Theatre Street. It gives me the creeps. That whole place. I don't know. Something in the air. Like it hasn't finished speaking. 'Tis being Hastings. You have the instincts of the poet, Poirot replied, adjusting his hat and stepping out into the damp cobbles. It is true places like these do not easily forget violence, especially when the violence is not born of passion, but of precision. The iron gates to the dock behind the theater groaned as Poirot pushed them open. No police tape remained. Inspector Garroway had declared the case nearly closed. But Poirot was not convinced. He moved past crates and half-unloaded scenery wagons until he reached the corner, where Cattermole's body had been found. He knelt. Hastings watched from behind, arms folded. We've seen it before. What are we looking for? Poirot ran his gloved fingers along the base of the nearby column. We are not looking, Hastings. We are listening. To what? To the conversation between choices, Poirot murmured. Why this corner, and not the door? Why kill him here, and not elsewhere? Why strike once to the skull, and not more? Each decision tells us something. He rose. The murderer knew his way around this dock. He knew the quietest time to act, the precise angle from which he would not be seen by the stagehands or the musicians. This was not improvisation, it was orchestration. Poirot turned and began retracing the steps from the dock's shadows to the theater's rear entrance. Hastings followed. Who would know the opera's Now, the pair sat in Poirot's flat, a tray of untouched breakfast between them. Hastings had been drumming his fingers against the side of his teacup for some minutes, before finally breaking the silence. Do you believe it was Venn? He asked. He seemed unnerved. Yes, but there's still no proof. The man is cold, but not necessarily murderous. Poirot, seated by the window with his gaze turned to the gray horizon, didn't look up. No, Hastings. Not Venn alone. Hastings blinked. Then who? Poirot reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small, creased scrap of paper. This was slipped beneath our door early this morning. No knock, no footfalls, but the handwriting, the flourishes, the panic disguised as elegance. He handed the note to Hastings, who read aloud. He was going to ruin us both. I warned him to stop. I never meant for it to end like this, please. I only wanted him frightened, not dead. I can't go to the police, but I beg you keep Lady Durand safe. There was no signature. Hastings frowned. Well, it could be anyone. Annalise, Finch. Poirot shook his head. Finch is too blunt, too hasty, and Annalise lacks the nerve for midnight messages. No, this was written by someone who believes they are playing protector, not conspirator. Lady Durand? No, Poirot said softly, but someone close to her, someone for whom her protection is a consuming duty. Hastings' eyes widened. Miss Netherfield? Poirot inclined his head slightly. It is a possibility, one we must now test. By midday, the fog had retreated somewhat, giving way to the pale melancholy of a London sun. Poirot and Hastings returned to the Durand estate, where they were received with evident surprise by Lady Durand's companion. Miss Netherfield was standing in the vestibule, arranging fresh-cut roses, a large pair of garden shears in hand. Her usual stern composure slipped briefly at the sight of Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she said with a nod, "you've returned early. I do hope I am not intruding upon your arrangements." Poirot replied politely, eyeing the flowers. "May I compliment your taste roses in July? Quite a symbol of patience and care." "They are her ladyship's favorites," Netherfield replied, voice clipped. "Indeed," Poirot said, stepping closer. "And you, do you favor quiet beauty, Miss Netherfield? Or are you fond of more direct expressions?" She paused, arching an eyebrow. "I don't follow." Poirot gestured delicately toward the shears. "Some prefer the pruning of the rose to the admiration of its bloom." "I'm afraid I still don't understand. Let me be plain," he said softly. "A note was delivered to my home this morning, anonymous, but written by someone intimate with this household, someone who wished to protect Lady Durand at all costs, someone who feared that Mr. Cattermole's manipulations would shatter more than just reputations." Netherfield's grip on the shears tightened slightly. "You saw something," Poirot continued, "or heard something, perhaps a private conversation, perhaps a letter you were never meant to read, but you kept it quiet until the guilt grew louder than the secret." For a moment, silence reigned. The flowers lay forgotten in the vase. Then she turned away sharply. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice taut. Poirot said nothing. He merely offered a small bow and gestured to Hastings, who stepped back. "Then forgive me for intruding," Poirot said as they exited the house. Hastings let out a long breath. "That was tense. Do you really believe she's the one who sent the note?" Poirot pursed his lips. "I do. But I do not believe she is the killer. No, Hastings, Miss Netherfield is the whisper behind the curtain. But someone else drew the blade. That evening, another message arrived, this time not delivered in secrecy, but left boldly at the front counter of Scotland Yard. Inspector Garroway summoned Poirot immediately. The message was short, typed, and without ornament. "You are drawing too near. If you value what remains of her name, stop digging. Let sleeping debts lie." Poirot held the slip gently, as if afraid it might crumble in his hands. "A threat," Garroway said, standing nearby. "What do you make of it?" Poirot was still. "No, Inspector, not a threat. A negotiation. One that tells me the killer is frightened but not reckless. They are calculating, afraid not of justice, but of shame." He looked out the window again, toward the theater district. "It is time, mon ami. The last act approaches, and the audience must be ready." He turned, eyes gleaming. "Call them all. Tomorrow evening, at the stage itself." Chapter 9. Curtain Call and Crimson Theater stood quietly under the amber haze of the city's street lamps. The fog curling around its gables let the slow unfurling of forgotten memories. Inside, the stage of the Royal Grafton was empty, dimly lit by a single lantern placed at center stage. Poirot's idea. It was theatrical, certainly, but also meaningful. The lantern, he said, would guide the truth through the darkness. The main players arrived one by one. Lady Durand, cloaked in her usual grays, entered with a dignified hesitation, her eyes darting nervously toward Poirot. Miss Netherfield followed silently behind her, eyes fixed ahead, lips pressed into a tight line. Raymond Finch arrived next, coat disheveled, hands thrust in his pockets. He cast a long glance around the stage, as if looking for something familiar, something safe. Then came Annalise, her hair pinned with precision, but her smile absent. She walked briskly, chin high, trying to project confidence. And finally, Harold Venn, face unreadable, the faintest shadow of fatigue beneath his eyes. None spoke. Poirot stood at the front of the stage, beneath the gentle flicker of the lantern. Hastings was off to the side, notebook in hand, though he knew Poirot never referred to written notes at a time like this. Inspector Garraway sat in the front row, arms folded, expression as taut as a snare drum. Poirot stepped forward and began. "My friends," he said gently, "thank you for coming. Tonight, I have asked you here not simply to revisit the tragedy of Desmond Cattermole's death, but to illuminate the web of secrets that have for too long gone unspoken." An uneasy rustle spread among the guests. No one dared interrupt. Poirot continued, voice calm but resonant. "I have often said that murder is rarely born from chaos. It is most often the fruit of logic twisted by fear, desperation, or pride. And so, we return to our key players." He gestured toward Lady Durand, a woman haunted by the remnants of her late husband's legacy, and ensnared by the manipulations of a cunning blackmailer, one whose silence was purchased with dignity and the last threads of peace. Lady Durand's hands trembled, but she met Poirot's eyes squarely. Poirot turned, and Miss Netherfield, the devoted companion, one who saw, who suspected, who perhaps even confronted Cattermole with a threat, but lacked the cruelty to carry it through. She believed she was protecting her friend, but someone else was watching. Miss Netherfield's jaw clenched. Poirot began to pace slowly, drawing their eyes with him. Annalise, the elegant, poised fiancée, a woman who had everything to lose should her secrets be revealed, secrets Cattermole had discovered. He did not merely threaten exposure. No, he took pleasure in dangling destruction before those he deemed inferior. Annalise inhaled sharply, but then Poirot said, turning on his heel, "We have Raymond Finch, a playwright. Yes, but more than that. A man nursing old ambitions, and perhaps older wounds. You disliked Cattermole, did you not?" Finch looked startled. "Everyone did. He was unbearable, indeed," Poirot said. "But you had something more. You believed, perhaps, that Cattermole's letters to you praising your early work, dangling the promise of production, might still be genuine, even after you knew the kind of man he truly was. Hope can blind as surely as fear." Finch said nothing. Poirot's gaze shifted finally to Harold Venn. "And you, Monsieur Venn, the silent investor, the quiet wolf, it was you who allowed Cattermole back into the theater world, was it not?" Venn nodded stiffly. "You had your reasons," Poirot continued. "The debts he threatened to reveal, the financial entanglements that might have ruined you. So you tolerated him. You distanced yourself, but you were always watching." Poirot turned, now standing directly beneath the lantern's light. The whole theater seemed to hold its breath. "But the murderer," he said quietly, "was not one of these." Murmurs rose, quickly silenced by his upraised hand. No, the murderer was not driven solely by hatred or desperation. They were driven by humiliation, by betrayal, by love turned cold. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage and looked straight at Annalise. "Miss Hartman," he said softly, "shall we speak now of the letters?" She froze. Poirot's tone did not change, but it grew ever so slightly gentler. "The ones he wrote to you in Vienna. You thought they were sincere. You fell for the promise he dangled, not of fame, but of escape, of companionship. And then you discovered the truth. Annelies's face went pale. He had shown those letters to Finch, mocked them to others, laughed at your hopes, and when you confronted him when he smirked in your face and called you a provincial fool, you snapped. No, she whispered. You took the prop blade from the stage. You meant to frighten him, but you knew the timing of the scene. You knew the moment the real sword would be used, and in that moment you made the switch. You counted on the chaos, and afterward you wept as though shocked by your performance. It was flawless. Tears glistened in her eyes, but her voice was calm. He deserved it, she said softly. He destroyed people for sport. Poirot nodded solemnly. Perhaps, but justice, mademoiselle, is not for us to seize with violence. Inspector Garroway stood, stepping forward. Anneliese offered no resistance. As the inspector led her away, the others sat in stunned silence. The lantern flickered once more and then dimmed, as if at the closing of a curtain. Poirot, ever fastidious, straightened his cuffs. It is always in the theater, he murmured, where illusion and truth dance closest. And yet, the truth, it always takes its bow. Chapter 10. The final exit theater was empty once more. Anneliese Hartmann had been taken quietly, without protest, her final words echoing faintly in Poirot's mind. He destroyed people for sport. Yet, even as the truth emerged in its theatrical climax, Poirot remained still, unsatisfied. Hastings noticed it immediately. They stood on the darkened stage after the others had left, the amber lantern now extinguished. You've caught her, Hastings said gently. It's over, isn't it? Poirot's eyes remained fixed on the space where Anneliese had stood. Non, he said quietly. It is not over, mon ami. There is something, how do you say it? Unsettled. Something that does not quite fit. Hastings frowned. But her motive, her opportunity. It was clear. Poirot nodded slowly. Yes, she had the motive and the means. But murder, Hastings, is not only the act, it is the psychology, the emotional logic. And this, he waved a hand toward the ghostly stage, this ending, it rings too. Symmetrical. He turned sharply on his heel and walked toward the wings. Come, there's still a shadow that has not been cast. The next morning, the fog hung low over the Thames, gray and muting. Poirot and Hastings arrived once again at the Lantern Wharf dock, the place where Cattermole's body had first been discovered. The theater was no longer a crime scene, but this place, this strange, theatrical resting ground, held secrets yet unsaid. Poirot walked slowly along the dock, glancing at the dark water, the rusted railing, the crates stacked high. Hastings watched him with curiosity. You think something happened here before the body was placed? I think, Poirot said, that Cattermole died in the theater, yes. But his body was moved, hidden in a crate, then staged dramatically here. Why such a spectacle? Why not simply flee? Why put him on display? Hastings didn't answer, because Poirot didn't expect him to. He stopped beside a large wooden crate, long emptied, but now Poirot examined its underside. Fingers brushing over something, faint scratches. He straightened. This crate, yes, it was used. But look here, the markings are fresh. Someone dragged it, not alone, but with help. Poirot's eyes lit. She did not act alone. Back at the station, Poirot requested a final interview with Lady Durand. She arrived, dignified as ever, but paler now, the fatigue of sleepless nights woven into her voice. I thought it was over, she said, settling in the chair across from him. Poirot folded his hands. Anneliese confessed. And yet, I find myself unconvinced. Her eyes narrowed. You doubt her guilt. I believe she stabbed Cattermole, yes. But I do not believe she staged the death. Lady Durand was silent. Poirot continued. To drag a heavy crate from the theater to the docks, in the dead of night, through an alley and a wharf, it is not the act of a frightened young woman alone. No, it required planning, assistance, and perhaps An investment in keeping certain reputations intact. Her hands curled tightly in her lap. Poirot leaned forward. "Tell me, Lady Durand, after Annalise confessed to you that she had struck Cattermole, what did you do?" She flinched. "It was the smallest movement. You helped her," Poirot said gently, "because you believed it would destroy the theater, destroy everything your husband had built. So you called Harold Venn." Lady Durand inhaled sharply, her composure fracturing. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "She came to me in tears, covered in blood. He was still alive when she left the stage," she said, dazed. But when she returned, he was gone. Poirot's eyes sharpened. "Gone, yes," she said. "And Venn. He said we must protect her, that no one would believe it was not premeditated. We put him in the crate, took him to the dock." Poirot stood slowly. "So he was alive when placed in the crate." Lady Durand did not respond. Poirot's voice dropped. "Madam, are you saying Harold Venn murdered Desmond Cattermole after Annalise fled the scene?" Tears brimmed in her eyes. "I don't know. I never looked inside again. But Venn, he said it would be cleaner that way. He said the scandal must be controlled. I was a coward, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot nodded grimly. "Merci, Lady Durand. That will be all for now." Poirot and Hastings visited Venn last. The man was in his office, seated beneath the golden mask of Thalia that adorned his mantle. He did not rise when they entered. "You already know," he said flatly. Poirot tilted his head. "I suspected. But now I am sure." Venn sighed, eyes distant. "It was an accident, truly. She wounded him, but it didn't kill him. He stumbled, fell backstage, concussed perhaps. I found him there, raving, bleeding, but breathing." Hastings stared in horror. "You finished it." Venn's jaw tightened. "He would have destroyed us all. He would have exposed her, exposed my debts, ruined the theater. So yes, I struck him. I told myself it was mercy." Poirot turned away, silent, then looked down at his hands. "And in the end, what did it buy me? Nothing. A dead man, a ruined woman, and a stage with no curtain call." Inspector Garroway entered moments later. There would be no drama this time, only quiet surrender. Outside, the clouds parted for a brief moment, revealing a sliver of sunlight. Poirot stood at the edge of the dock, gazing across the river. "You were right," Hastings said beside him. "There was one last shadow." Poirot nodded. And now it too has taken its final bow." Chapter 11. Shadows left behind. Thou Harold Venn had been arrested with little protest. The case left behind an echo of unease, like a stage not yet fully cleared after the final act. The headlines blared with poetic finality. Theater scandal ends in murder. And the public moved on with the indifference only time could provide. But Poirot, ever attuned to the subtle dissonances of truth, lingered. Hastings found him in the drawing room of Whitehaven Mansions several mornings later, a teacup untouched and a neat pile of theater programs on the table before him. "You're still troubled?" Hastings asked, settling in with a sigh. Poirot gave a small nod, fingers tapping the handle of the cup. "Oui, mon ami. A thread dangles. Something not quite right." Hastings frowned. "We've uncovered the truth, haven't we? Annalise wounded Cattermole. Venn finished him off. Lady Durand helped stage the deception. What else is there?" Poirot leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Let me ask you this. What did Cattermole have that was so dangerous, so powerful? It made 3 people risk everything to silence him?" "The letters," Hastings offered. Not just the letters. He had something more than blackmail. He had influence." Poirot reached into a folder and produced the old envelope they had recovered weeks ago. "I have reviewed these again and again. Each letter Cattermole possessed linked someone to scandal, but all predated his return to the theater. So why did he return? Why come back to this theater? Why now?" Hastings stared. You think there was someone else? Someone we've overlooked? Poirot's voice lowered. Yes, and I believe that person was the one who summoned Cattermole back to London in the first place. That afternoon, Poirot requested a final visit with Anneliese Hartmann. She sat in Holloway Prison's visiting hall. Demure and resigned, her youthful glow dulled by gray light and sleepless nights. Yet when Poirot entered, her gaze lifted with a faint glimmer of hope. I've said everything I know, Monsieur Poirot, she said softly. Oui, but I do not believe you have said everything you suspect. Her expression faltered. Poirot sat across from her, folding his arms gently. You told Lady Durand you wounded Cattermole during a rehearsal argument. You left him bleeding, and when you returned he was gone. Anneliese nodded slowly. But what if? Poirot continued. He never left the stage of his own accord. What if someone else found him first? Her lips parted slightly. He could see the tension in her hands. You see, mademoiselle, Venn claims he found Cattermole alone backstage. But I have found reason to believe Venn was not even in the building until later that evening. Her eyes widened. Then who was? You know, don't you? She hesitated. Poirot waited patiently, and at last she spoke, voice trembling. There was someone else in the theater that night. I didn't see them clearly. Just a shadow on the balcony. I thought, perhaps it was Cattermole watching me. He had been doing that lingering unseen, always just beyond the curtain. Poirot nodded gravely. Not him. Someone who knew the theater inside and out. Someone who could move unseen. Someone who had more to lose than even Lady Durand. Anneliese frowned. Who? Poirot smiled sadly. The one person who benefited most from Cattermole's death, yet remained untouched by scandal. The next morning, Poirot arrived unannounced at a modest flat near Kensington. There, behind a nondescript door, lived Albert Harrow, the quiet stage hand with an encyclopedic knowledge of the theater's structure, its secrets, and its ghosts. Harrow answered the door in a housecoat. Surprised but not alarmed. Monsieur Poirot, he said. Come in, if you must. Poirot entered, pausing as his eyes roved over the interior. It was immaculate, not unlike a technician's workspace. On one table rested a stack of clippings articles about the Cattermole murder. A framed photo of the Lantern Theater's original cast hung above the hearth. Poirot gestured toward it. You were once an actor yourself, non? Harrow's mouth tightened. Briefly, until I learned the theater had little patience for those who refused its politics or its blackmail. Poirot added gently. Harrow's hand clenched. You knew Cattermole, Poirot said, long before Anneliese did. You were there when he was cast out. You knew he'd come back, and you made sure that when he did, he wouldn't leave alive. Harrow didn't deny it. His shoulders dropped. Venn lied to protect Lady Durand and Anneliese, Poirot continued. But the true moment of death occurred not at her hand, nor at Venn's. It was you, Monsieur Harrow, who found Cattermole backstage and finished what she could not. You who hid in the wings like a phantom. I had to, Harrow murmured. He ruined so many lives. He tried to come back and play the part of puppeteer again. I wouldn't let him. Poirot said nothing. At last, Harrow looked up. I don't regret it. Poirot gave a small nod. No, but the law may not share your sentiment. As Poirot walked away from the flat, Hastings awaited him by a lamppost, puzzled. Why didn't you tell the police immediately? Poirot sighed. I will, but there is something to be said for the theater, mon ami. Even the smallest roles deserve their curtain call. He looked toward the rising sun over London. And justice, I like drama, must be complete. Chapter 12. The final Monolaghethy stage had been swept. The dust had settled, but Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, refused to leave even a single curtain uninspected. And thus, on a quiet Thursday evening, he summoned those remaining to the Lantern Theater for one final act, not for entertainment, but for truth. The dusk had bled violet across the London skyline by the time they gathered. Lady Durand, veiled in mourning but composed. Anneliese Hartmann, pale and restrained under escort. Harold Venn, released on bail and unusually silent. And finally, Albert Harrow summoned, but unaware he was now center stage. Hastings stood by Poirot near the apron of the stage. Puzzled but watchful, Poirot, in his immaculate gray suit, addressed them from the orchestra pit, as though a conductor waiting for the final note. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, "I thank you for indulging one final gathering. You must forgive me for this unorthodox setting, but I believe that the theater, which has concealed so many lies, should now serve as the place of unveiling." Lady Durand raised an elegant brow. "Poirot, really, what more could there be? The truth, unpleasant though it is, has already emerged, has it?" Poirot asked, stepping forward. "Let us consider what we know. Cattermole returned from exile with secrets, yes. He was blackmailing Lady Durand. He was cruel to Anneliese. He provoked Harold Venn. But I ask you, was any one of those motives enough to kill him?" Harrow shifted slightly. Poirot noted it. "Lady Durand," Poirot continued, "you staged a clever misdirection. You fed a false narrative to protect your young protégé. You implied that she had killed a man in panic. A desperate act. You even involved Harold Venn, who tried to shield you both. He turned to Anneliese. You wounded Cattermole, yes, but you did not kill him." Anneliese closed her eyes, saying nothing. "And Venn?" Poirot smiled thinly. "He lied, but not to protect himself. He lied out of loyalty and fear." There was silence. Poirot's voice grew sharper, more theatrical. "No, the death of Ambrose Cattermole was no act of passion. It was not the result of a quarrel, nor an impulsive strike. It was an execution, calculated, cold, conceived in shadows." His gaze shifted to Harrow. "You knew the theater better than anyone. Its trapdoors, its blind spots, its echoes. You were there the night Cattermole died, not as a witness but as the hand of judgment." All eyes turned to Harrow, who remained motionless in his chair. Poirot's tone softened, but lost none of its force. "You were once an actor, were you not? You stood on this very stage. But Cattermole ended that, not with words, but with poison. He blackballed you from every theater in London. He did the same to others, your friends, your peers. You watched them fade into obscurity, while he plotted a triumphant return." Poirot stepped onto the stage now, drawing close. "You found him backstage. He was bleeding, weak. You saw your chance. You silenced him not for revenge alone, but to ensure he could never rise again." Harrow's jaw worked. At last, he spoke, voice raw. "You're wrong." Poirot waited. "I didn't go there to kill him. I went to make him leave. I saw the blood. I panicked. He said something vile about Anneliese, about what he'd do to her next. And he swallowed. I ended it. Merci," Poirot said softly. Harrow blinked. "That's it. Yes, you have said it at last," and in doing so, lifted the final veil. Harold Venn stood suddenly. "Then what happens now? Another trial? Another scandal?" Poirot shook his head. "None. I will give my statement to Inspector Rowe, of course. But I believe the Crown Prosecution Service may exercise discretion. The wounds Cattermole inflicted emotional, reputational, spiritual cannot be measured in courtrooms." Lady Durand let out a breath. Folding her gloved hands in her lap, Poirot turned once more to the group. "Let this be the final performance. The theater must return to art, not vengeance. And the ghosts that have lingered here must now take their bow later." As Hastings and Poirot walked the length of the fog-lined embankment, Hastings remained unusually quiet. "You believed Harrow would confess?" Poirot gave a small smile. "It was never certain. But the stage, mon ami, it has a way of coaxing the truth, especially from those who once loved it. And you think justice is done?" Poirot stopped, looked up at the gas lamps flickering in the night air. "I think justice is never perfect," he said. "But sometimes, if we are fortunate, we get close enough to sleep without guilt." And with that, the curtain truly fell. Chapter 13. The script that burned the morning after Harrow's confession dawned with a quietness so absolute it felt staged an intermission in the theater of consequences. Poirot, however, did not believe in intermissions, for even in quiet, things smoldered beneath Dot in his modest lodging off Baker Street. Poirot sat by the window, sipping chocolate and reviewing his case notes. Hastings entered with a copy of the Times tucked under his arm, and an expression of subdued satisfaction. "They've printed it," Hastings said, laying the paper before Poirot. "Mystery at Lantern Theater unravels prominent stage hand confesses." Poirot merely nodded. "As expected. And yet—" Hastings paused. "Yet—" Poirot tapped his finger on the teacup, gaze distant. "It is all too neat, mon ami, too clean. But Harrow confessed. Oui. But he confessed to ending a man who was already wounded. We have accepted that his hand struck the final blow, but not that it was the only one raised. The murder of Cattermole was not merely a moment of rage. It was a conclusion. A conclusion to what?" Poirot leaned back in his chair. "To a plan. A theater such as this, steeped in rivalry, betrayal, old wounds, is the perfect place for plots. And I began to suspect Harrow was not the playwright, merely the final actor." Before Hastings could object, a knock came at the door. A telegram. Poirot opened it, scanning quickly, then handed it to Hastings. "To Poirot, stop, urgent discovery, stop, stage manager found burnt script behind costume vault, stop. Cordon for your review, stop." Inspector Rowe. Poirot was already on his feet. "Come, Hastings. There is a scene yet unplayed." The Lantern Theater was quiet now, its corridors no longer ringing with rehearsals or whispers. The house was dark, the seats covered in dust sheets, and the air was heavy with disuse. Poirot and Hastings were escorted backstage by Inspector Rowe himself. "In here," Rowe said, leading them into the old costume vault beneath the orchestra pit. Stagehands were clearing some moth-bitten cloaks when they smelled something burnt. They found this behind a rotted mannequin. He pointed to a small iron brazier, long cold, and within it, the charred remains of a sheaf of paper, curled at the edges, but partially preserved. Poirot delicately lifted the top page with tweezers. The singed corner revealed a title, handwritten in looping ink. "The Reckoning of Shadows" by A.C. Poirot blinked. "A.C. Ambrose Cattermole," Hastings said softly. "Mace non," Poirot said. "That would be too easy. And too boastful." Cattermole never used initials. He wanted his full name in lights. He was a man of ego, not humility. Rowe frowned. "So who is A.C.?" Poirot examined the script, turning over a few more fragile pages. "This is not a play. It is a confession disguised as one. A fictional drama based on real crimes, betrayals among actors, blackmail, exile, and finally, a murder on stage." He paused. "This play predicts Cattermole's death, nearly scene for scene." Rowe swore under his breath. "The author must have written it as either a threat or a revelation," Poirot murmured. "But someone tried to destroy it. Only, not completely. Why leave it in a place someone might find? Unless," Hastings said slowly, "they wanted it to be found." "'Twas Hastings. You begin to think like Poirot." Poirot turned to Rowe. "I must ask that this script be preserved and reviewed page by page. It will tell us more than any confession." Rowe nodded. "And what are you thinking, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot's gaze sharpened. "That this story was authored not in ink but in vengeance." Later that evening, Poirot returned alone to the now empty stage of the Lantern. The seats stretched before him, empty eyes in the darkness. He stood center stage, letting the silence speak. He spoke softly, as though to the ghosts of the theater. "You wrote the script. You lit the fire. You sent the actors to play their parts. But you, the true director, you stayed behind the curtain. The shadows said nothing, but Poirot had seen enough shadows to know they never stayed silent forever. As he turned to leave, a glint of brass caught his eye beneath the proscenium arch, a monogrammed cigarette case half concealed in the dust. He bent, inspecting it. The initials gleamed faintly, AC, but on the inside, etched in faint, hurried strokes. Another set of initials, AH. Poirot stared. "Ah," he whispered, slipping the case into his pocket. "The curtain has not fallen after all." Chapter 14. The actress who never left. Late afternoon light filtered through the cracked glass of the Lantern Theater's upper windows, painting golden ribbons across the old seats and broken balcony. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the wings, the monogrammed cigarette case heavy in his pocket. He had not told Inspector Rowe about the second set of initials, not yet. That discovery, Poirot knew, would become the lever upon which the entire machinery of deception would turn. From the shadows behind the stage, soft footsteps approached. Poirot turned to see Sybil Vane still in mourning black, her eyes red from a grief that seemed genuine, though not uncomplicated. "You asked to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" she said softly, her voice like creased parchment. Poirot offered a slight bow. "Mademoiselle Vane, it is not a matter of interrogation, merely conversation. Let us sit." They took seats on the edge of the stage, facing the ghost light that flickered eerily in the center of the floorboards. "I imagine it is difficult," Poirot began, "to lose both a partner and a career in a single night." Sybil's mouth trembled slightly. "More than you know. Ambrose was monstrous, yes, but he was still my life." Poirot gave a small nod. "And yet, he kept secrets from you. Letters, scripts, perhaps even enemies." Sybil laughed bitterly. "Ambrose never kept enemies. He collected them, like trophies." Poirot reached into his coat and retrieved the cigarette case. "You recognize this?" She stiffened. "It's his. He never went anywhere without it." Poirot opened the lid slowly, exposing the elegant AC engraving. Then, with a gentle turn, he displayed the hastily scratched AH initials inside. Sybil inhaled sharply. "That wasn't there before, non?" Poirot tilted his head. "And yet it is scratched quite recently. I believe someone borrowed this case. Someone with different initials. Someone perhaps afraid." There was a long silence. Finally, Sybil whispered, "Adelaide." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Adelaide Horn, our understudy. She was always around, listening. She idolized Ambrose, but he mocked her cruelly. He called her a stage filler with dreams above her pay. I sometimes wondered if she loved him or hated him." Poirot folded his hands. "Is she still in town?" "No," Sybil replied. "She left the morning after the murder. She said she needed time to think, and that she couldn't bear the police questions." "Did she write plays?" Sybil hesitated, then nodded. Quietly, she was secretive about it, always scribbling in the corners, writing scenes she never showed anyone. She even joked once that she was writing a fictional revenge piece against Ambrose. "I thought she was venting. Did she ever use initials for her work?" Sybil swallowed. "Only always, AC." She said it was her private joke. Her fake pen name, Adelaide Cattermole. She thought it sounded grand. Poirot's eyes glinted. "So she was the author of The Reckoning of Shadows." Sybil's voice dropped to a whisper. "But if she wrote that script, she predicted Ambrose's death." "No," Poirot said. "She staged it." That evening, Poirot summoned Inspector Rowe and Hastings to his lodgings, placing the cigarette case, charred pages of the script, and several clippings on the table. "The case is shifting, messieurs," Poirot began, "and we are no longer merely looking at a crime of passion. We are looking at a performance, meticulously staged." Rowe frowned. "You're saying this girl Adelaide planned it all?" Harrow may have delivered the final blow, but it was Adelaide who wrote the scene." He turned to the charred pages. Her script was a blueprint, not just for the murder, but for the manipulation. She planted the play. She made sure Harrow would read it. She let Sybil believe Ambrose might change the will. And when the time came, she ensured the dagger would be within reach. But why burn the script? Hastings asked. Poirot smiled. To create mystery. She knew it would be found. The brazier had not burned hot enough to destroy the evidence entirely. It was a theatrical flourish, one last act in her drama. Roe leaned forward. So where is she now? I've asked the station master for train logs. Adelaide took a ticket to Whitby under a false name. I believe she plans to disappear into the provinces. A failed actress reborn as an author, one who has seen her play performed to deadly effect. Poirot looked toward the window, where twilight was settling. But the theater has a way of holding its ghosts close, he said. And the final curtain does not fall until all the players take their bow. Roe stood. Then we bring her back to the stage. Poirot nodded. We, Inspector. And this time, she shall answer not to an audience but to the law. Chapter 15. The bow before the Falth coastal wind howled against the Whitby station sign. As the train hissed to a stop, fog spilled onto the platform like a curtain descending on an empty stage. Poirot stepped onto the wet stone in his neatly polished shoes. His mustache waxed to perfection despite the wind's protest. Beside him stood Inspector Roe, collar up, eyes alert. She arrived under the name Miss Delia March. Roe muttered, checking the ticket ledger once again. 2 days ago. Lodging house on Parsons Crescent. Quiet place, cheap, bon, Poirot murmured. The actress chooses simplicity. That alone suggests guilt. A woman seeking obscurity after a crime often betrays herself through modesty. They walked together down slick, narrow streets until they reached the ivy-choked fence of No. 12 Parsons Crescent. A wooden sign swung weakly on its chain. Rooms to let. Mrs. Hibblethwaite. The landlady who answered was all tweed and tea breath, but her eyes were sharp. Miss March? She's in. Keeps to herself, barely touches breakfast. May we see her? Poirot asked gently. Mrs. Hibblethwaite sniffed. 3rd floor, last on the left. But I'll not have any row, mind you. As they climbed, Poirot could hear the unmistakable sound of a typewriter clicking in rapid, erratic strokes. The rhythm stopped the moment Roe knocked. There was silence. Then, yes? Miss Horne, Poirot said, abandoning the alias. It is Hercule Poirot. May we speak? More silence. Then footsteps measured, reluctant. The door opened. Adelaide Horne stood in a worn green cardigan and faded skirt. Her eyes were tired but intelligent, darting between Poirot and the inspector with careful calculation. I knew it was only a matter of time, she said, stepping back. They entered the room. It was bare, save for the bed, a writing desk, and a stack of theater playbills tied with red ribbon. On the desk sat the typewriter, a single sheet in the carriage. Poirot's eyes fell to it. Scene V. The blade gleams beneath the moonlight. He does not see her coming. Still writing, mademoiselle? He asked softly. Adelaide smiled without humor. It's all I've ever had. The stage wouldn't have me. The critics ignored me. But the words listened. Poirot seated himself on the edge of the bed. You wrote The Reckoning of Shadows. You left it where Harrow would find it. You whispered to Sybil that Ambrose had changed his will. You scratched your initials into his cigarette case to confuse the trail. Adelaide's eyes did not flinch. Did Harrow tell you that? Poirot shook his head. None. But you underestimate the little gray cells. Roe stepped forward. You manipulated the people into wanting Ambrose Drake dead, and neither of them had the nerve. Adelaide snapped. I stood in that theater night after night, watching him destroy every woman on that stage. His cruelty was applauded. His affairs were forgotten. His brilliance protected him. Poirot did not interrupt. He simply observed. Adelaide looked away. So I wrote the script. I let Harrow believe it was fate. I let Sybil believe she might finally inherit freedom. But it was always me. I played the part. I wore the costume. I stepped from the wings. I killed him." Poirot rose slowly. "And now?" Adelaide turned to the window. "Now the play is over." Rowe moved to rest her, but Poirot raised a hand. "Allow me," he said. He approached Adelaide gently. "You are not a villain, mademoiselle, but justice it must take its bow." She nodded once, her shoulders heavy with the knowledge that the curtain had indeed fallen. Back at Poirot's flat 2 days later, Hastings stared at the headlines spread across the table. "Actress confesses to the murder of Ambrose Drake. Scripted revenge. Killer used play to enact death." He looked up at Poirot, who was enjoying a small cup of chocolate show. "I must admit, Poirot, I never would have suspected her. She seemed so invisible." Poirot tapped his temple. "Precisely, mon ami. Invisibility is often the greatest disguise. She turned her failure into opportunity, her rejection into revenge." Hastings frowned, but Harrow still struck him, a reflex, a moment of panic. But it was Adelaide who ensured the scene was written, rehearsed, and ready. He sighed. "The stage is an unforgiving place, Hastings. It gives applause to the loudest voice, but forgets the whispers that wrote the lines." Poirot folded his hands, but in this case, justice remembered the author. Chapter 16, the last encore of Ambrose Drake. The lamplight of Poirot's sitting room glimmered faintly off the silver edge of the newspaper scissors. Hastings, sitting opposite, still held a crumpled edition of the Evening Herald. The headline was damning. "Actress Killer Pleads Guilty, Curtain Falls on the Drama at Marlowe's." "Do you think she ever really intended to get away with it?" Hastings asked, scratching his chin. "I mean, why write a confession into the script itself? It's like she wanted to be caught." Poirot looked up from his polishing cloth. "Ah, mon cher Hastings, you stumble upon truth as a man in the dark stumbles upon furniture painfully and without intent. But truth all the same. You mean she planned to be found out?" "No," Poirot said, setting the cloth aside. "She planned to be understood. But to be understood, one must first be seen. And to be seen, one must write themselves into the spotlight." Hastings looked puzzled. Still, it was all rather twisted. The false initials in the case, the tampered prop blade, the real knife hidden until that final scene. Poirot said, "but we must now turn our minds to what remains unresolved." Hastings blinked. "Unresolved. But she confessed." Poirot stood and walked to the small desk by the fireplace. From a drawer, he retrieved a folded document, a scanned copy of Ambrose Drake's last will and testament. "She confessed to the murder." "Yes," Poirot said, "but Adelaide Horn did not forge the will." Hastings sat upright. "What?" "The version left in Ambrose Drake's dressing room, the one found in his coat, left the majority of his estate to Sybil Lavington. But the legal version, held by his solicitor, favored his sister's charity. The two are not the same. One is genuine, the other, fabrication." "You're saying someone else tampered with the will?" Poirot nodded. "And I believe, mon ami, that whoever forged it was counting on Adelaide Horn to take the fall for far more than just murder." Before Hastings could press further, a knock came at the door. Miss Lemon stepped in a moment later, her heels clicking crisply on the floor. "A letter just arrived for you, Monsieur Poirot. No return address." Poirot took the envelope, its paper thick and coarse. Inside was a single card, typed neatly, "If the script ends with Adelaide, you've missed the last act. Not all ghosts wear masks." A friend of the curtain. Poirot's brow furrowed. He handed the note to Hastings. "Now that," said Hastings, "is ominous." Poirot was quiet for a moment, then said, "The stage is not yet cleared. There are shadows behind the final curtain." That evening, Poirot and Hastings paid an unexpected visit to the Marlowe Theatre. Its marquee was dark now, the play cancelled, the actors dismissed. Yet the old janitor, whom Poirot had befriended during their earlier investigation, welcomed them inside. They moved through the dusty wings and corridors until they reached the main stage, where the final scene of the reckoning of shadows had unfolded. Poirot stood center stage, gazing out into the empty auditorium. "It was here," he murmured, "where art and vengeance became one. Spooky place when it's empty," Hastings whispered. Looking over his shoulder, Poirot turned. "Let us inspect the prop table one last time." They moved backstage. The cluttered table still bore remnants of the production-bent scripts, cracked makeup pots, torn lace. Poirot's fingers skimmed over each item until he paused at the tarnished makeup case. Carefully, he opened a hidden compartment at the back, a trick he had noticed days earlier, but left untouched. Inside was a small velvet pouch. From it, Poirot removed a ring, a gold signet ring with the initials ADH. He held it up to the flickering utility bulb. Hastings leaned in. "But that's Ambrose Drake's," he said. "The one he supposedly never took off." "It wasn't on his body." "Exactly," Poirot said. "And Adelaide never mentioned it." He flipped open the underside of the ring. Inside was a scrap of tightly folded parchment, ink-smeared but legible. It read, "Leave the will where she'll find it. Make sure Sybil knows. Adelaide will see the path clearly. And in the chaos, the stage is ours." C. Hastings reeled. "See, who on earth is C?" Poirot closed the ring and slipped it into his pocket. "Mon ami," he said softly. "The play has one act left, and I believe we have just found its director." Chapter 17. The man in the curtain box. The next morning brought with it a gray drizzle and a fog that clung to the streets of London like a stubborn memory. Poirot and Hastings sat once again in the car, this time trundling through Charing Cross towards the solicitor's office of Felix Cubbins, the man who had handled Ambrose Drake's will. "A curious name on the note," Hastings said, staring out the window. "See, rather conveniently vague." "Not vague," Poirot replied. "Merely theatrical. It is the flourish of someone who believes themselves clever, perhaps too clever." When they arrived, Mr. Cubbins, a thin, jittery man with eyeglasses perpetually slipping down his nose, greeted them with wary politeness. Poirot wasted no time. "Monsieur, when did you last see Ambrose Drake?" Cubbins pursed his lips. "Roughly 10 days before his death. He came in to confirm changes to his will. Did anyone else have access to your files?" The solicitor stiffened. "No, certainly not. My office is secure. The copy of his will you possess, the one favoring Miss Lavington, is clearly a forgery. Ambrose signed nothing of the sort here." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Then I must ask, Monsieur, do you recognize this?" He withdrew the gold signet ring from his pocket and set it gently on the desk. Cubbins' expression paled. "Good heavens, that's Mr. Drake's. He wore it, always claimed it had belonged to his grandfather, a touring magician. Where did you find it?" Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he studied Cubbins' reaction. "And tell me, Monsieur," Poirot said, voice low, "have you ever been to the Marlowe Theatre?" The solicitor hesitated a fraction too long. "Only once, years ago." "Then let me remind you of something you may not recall clearly. There is a small box beside the main stage, concealed behind the velvet curtain near the lighting rig. A perfect perch for someone wishing to observe without being seen, someone who might manipulate props, someone who could hide the original ring and deliver instructions to Adelaide without ever stepping foot on stage." Cubbins rose from his chair, flustered. "Monsieur Poirot, these accusations, they are not accusations," Poirot said gently. "Merely observations. But I ask you one final thing. What debt did you owe Ambrose Drake, that you would betray his legacy so elaborately?" The man collapsed into his chair. "It wasn't betrayal," he muttered. "It was revenge. His kind of genius destroys those around him. My brother, he was in Drake's troupe once, years ago. Cast out, ruined, took his own life." Poirot nodded solemnly. So you forged the will, not to enrich anyone, but to tear apart those he loved. And you counted on Adelaide's grief to finish what you started. Cubbins said nothing more, but he did not resist as Poirot picked up the telephone and called the Yard. Chapter 18. Curtainful Inspector Japp arrived promptly at the solicitor's office, damp from the rain and uncharacteristically grave as Poirot delivered the final summation. Felix Cubbins stood silently by the window, defeated, his silhouette blurred against the drizzle on the glass. He forged the will, Poirot said, not for money, but for vengeance. His brother, once a magician under Ambrose Drake, was cast out in disgrace and later died. Monsieur Cubbins sought retribution not through murder, but through destruction of memory. He aimed to sully the name and legacy of the man he blamed. Adelaide Lavington's involvement? Japp asked, brow furrowed. She was deceived, Poirot said. The anonymous letters, the veiled instructions all orchestrated by Cubbins. He used her grief and confusion as tools, knowing she would follow what seemed like Ambrose's final wishes. The letter found in her dressing room, the posthumous requests, all planted, but the lantern? Hastings interjected. The child's drawing? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, yes, our small witness. It was the lantern that provided the first clue, the one seen on the night of Drake's death, illuminating a figure at the dockside. That figure was not Adelaide, as assumed, but Mr. Cubbins himself. The child's sketch captured something no adult eye could. The peculiar way the light bent against the thick, old-fashioned spectacles. Japp let out a low whistle, a solicitor in a top hat skulking around a theater prop box. Not your everyday criminal. He was counting on that, Poirot said. He wished to remain invisible not as a shadow, but as a respected professional, above suspicion. What about the poison? Hastings asked. Drake's death was ruled natural. Poirot nodded. There was no poison. Cubbins did not kill Drake. He merely capitalized on the moment. Ambrose died naturally, perhaps stress, perhaps age, but Cubbins was watching and waiting. He had already crafted the false will. All he needed was for death to arrive. And when it did, he acted swiftly, planting the forged documents and manipulating the scene. A long silence passed. Japp stepped toward Cubbins. You'll need to come with me. The solicitor turned, his face tired. I never wanted him dead. I just wanted the world to see who he really was. Poirot tilted his head. But monsieur, vengeance is a poison. You took no life, but you nearly destroyed one. Cubbins said nothing as he was let out into the rain. The following week, Poirot and Hastings returned to the Marlowe Theater. The dressing rooms were quiet, the air scented faintly with makeup and old costumes. In the main hall, Adelaide stood at center stage, alone, staring up into the rafters. Poirot approached gently. Mademoiselle, the truth, she has emerged from the shadows. Adelaide turned, her face softer, freer. You were right, she said. I didn't see it. I let the past dictate the script of my life. You are not alone, Poirot said. The grief, it clouds the vision, yes? But now the curtain can fall, and a new act may begin. She smiled. The theater's staying open. With Ambrose gone, I'll manage it myself. Maybe change the productions. Something lighter. Poirot bowed slightly. Bravo, as they left the stage. Hastings nudged Poirot. What tipped you off? The will, the ring? Poirot tapped his temple. None, mon ami. It was the child, the one who drew the man with the lantern. The child, you see, is the most honest detective of all, unburdened by motive, blind to deception. Only truth. They exited into the London dusk, where gas lamps flickered and the fog coiled like stage smoke around their feet. Poirot adjusted his hat. The case, he said, was not one of murder, but of masks, and like all the finest dramas, the truth waited patiently behind the curtain, and with that, the great detective stepped into the mist, the mystery behind him its final act complete.